Welcome back to HFO Multifamily Market Watch, your trusted source for information for apartment owners and investors. Multifamily Market Watch is presented by Pacific Exteriors Northwest, a contractor specializing in siding and exterior envelopes and delivering exceptional quality and service for over 30 years. And by Gantry Incorporated, the nation's largest independent mortgage banking firm.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. And today we have with us Dr. Gerard Mildner, retired professor from Portland State. I've had you on many times. Thanks again. Even though you're retired, I know you're still busy.
Glad to be here.
We see all your posts and all that and all the information. We're on some committees together. Revitalize Portland is one of them. I want to talk to you about some background on the Portland Supportive Housing Services Tax and its kind of role in addressing homelessness. And kind of, there's been some stuff in the press about it. So again, thanks for taking the time to talk about this. I think a lot of people maybe don't understand that, but
Sure.
Maybe shine a little light on that, and then we can get into kind of, what you see and maybe some recommendations.
So the tax was created in 2020, and it was intended to fund homeless services. So this can mean things like shelters, access centers, drug treatment, mental health treatment.
And is it metro-wide, city-wide?
Right. So it's a metro-wide tax.
Okay.
It covers 1% of the income above $125,000 for single filers, and 1% of the income over $200,000 for joint filers. And my understanding is there are about 30,000 people, 30,000 accounts in Multnomah County that pay this tax, and similar numbers in the suburban counties.
Right.
And so the Metro subcontracts with the city of Portland to administer the tax. They receive the funds, they take a cut to do administration, and then they send it out in a prearranged formula at each of the three counties.
Okay.
So that's the structure that's been operating since 2020, and the tax will sunset. It'll expire in 2030.
And again, for people that understand, there's this tax, but then there's also the Kindergarten for All tax, which is Multnomah County only. So again, this one is county, all three counties. So that's what we're going to get into on this one. We'll have another session about the other tax. So.
Right. With the other tax, you're talking, it only applies to Multnomah County, right, and similar threshold levels, and there the rate is 3%. So people are paying pretty significant amount of tax.
Yes, exactly. Multnomah County, although in the whole metro area, but then in Multnomah County specifically. So I know so this one's set to sunset.
Right.
And there's some questions about that, what to do with it, what not to do. Kind of shine a little light on where we are with that.
So Metro has been convened a negotiation, as it were, with the business community, with the Portland Metro Chamber.
Okay.
And the realtors, the PMAR, the Portland Metropolitan Realtors, got involved as well. And the agreement that they came up with, to me, it wasn't a very good deal. It was to extend the tax for another 20 years. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be around that many years. So this is going to run out.
We don't hope that. Now, come on, you're going to be maybe just not here in Portland, but
2050.
Yes, it's a long time.
2050.
Yes,
I mean, I'm going to be an extremely old man. Yeah. So it's effectively expectedly they want to make it a permanent tax. They did small little things to cut the rates a little bit, so the rate will drop from 1% to 0.9%. They've done some things to adjust the brackets for inflation. But it's basically this is a very similar tax. And then the other thing that they're suggesting to do is to divert money to cities, not just counties. And then secondly, to allocate some money for subsidized housing construction, building off Metro's experience. I wouldn't call it a success, but their experience with the affordable housing bond. So each one of these elements is a little bit troubling. The extension, I think, is crazy. I mean, we right now have the highest income tax rate in the country over, some fairly low range of incomes. And in Multnomah County and in Metro, so these two taxes combine to give us a very high tax rate.
On top of the state income tax.
When you combine it with the state income tax. I would also argue that the state legislature needs to establish its primacy over that tax. It is, local governments get the property tax in our state. State government relies extremely heavily on the income tax. If we make it punitive to earn income in the state and in the region and in the county, that's going to be harming the state's interests. So I think the state has an interest, the state legislature has an interest in reining this in.
Did they take part in this at all in terms of, you said this, group got put together? Was it more business interests within the metro area?
So the original proposal back in 2020 was put together by the service providers working with the Portland Metro Chamber. So they had created a coalition called the Here Together Coalition. And so this coalition is the one that's been interacting with Metro in terms of changing the tax. I think that part of the problem was that the tax receipts weren't used terribly well in Multnomah County. And so that drove the headlines, and that drove, I think, some of the changes to this tax or this tax proposal. I think the other is that Metro had an existing affordable housing bond that had expired. And from their point of view, they viewed that as a success, and they wanted to extend their activities in the subsidized housing field. And we can talk a little bit about that.
But is it your take that they figured this may be an easier way to get that through instead of a whole other, kind of package it with this tax extension?
That's right. I think they viewed reform as an easier way to sell something than a brand new tax.
Right.
And so they've tried to put into this various safeguards for community oversight. But if the overall structure of the proposal is flawed, then the oversight is not going to be that meaningful. And I think that the spending that's been happening over the last 4 or 5 years has been quite sensible in the sense of creating shelters, creating safe park facilities in the suburbs where people who don't have an apartment but have a car to live in, so they can go there. They can go into a safe parking area that's protected. Access centers. So those access centers, for example, could help people see if they qualify for supplemental security income (SSI). I mean, that can provide up to about $1,000 a month for an individual. That could be very helpful in getting people off the ground.
But as you mentioned, some counties did better than others in terms of allocation and what they did.
Yeah, and right now, this proposal that Metro has developed with a Here Together coalition has created some consternation amongst both the providers as well as the counties, because the county governments in Oregon are geared to provide health care and social welfare services. Typically, those are funded at the federal and state level, but that's what they do. The county health department is a major function for what county governments do. And so if you view homelessness in part as a social welfare problem, in fact, I would say it's a social welfare problem, counties are the right agency of government to implement the policy. They are not the right agencies, however, to fund it. Traditionally, when counties implement things like TANF grants, temporary assistance for needy families, or SNAP grants, supplemental nutrition programs, those are funded at the federal level or the state level, but implemented at a local level by counties in our state. And to suddenly put city government, so siphoning some of that money for cities, siphoning that money for affordable housing projects is really kind of outside the expertise, I would say, of those agencies of government.
So I'm curious on this coalition. You had, like you said, it was the Portland Business Alliance, I think, was part of this, and they were supporting extending this tax out. What was the give and take, or what's your opinion on that?
I think to get a good understanding, you're going to have to interview somebody like John Isaacs,
right,
or with the Portland Metro Chamber, or somebody like Michelle Gila with the Realtors to explain why they participated initially. My interaction with this was by serving on the Revitalize Portland Coalition, which is a business group,
right?
Has a very heavy real estate component to it. And we were offered, do you want to sign on to this deal? As kind of a take it or leave it option. So things had already been negotiated before the time
you weren't
we
brought
were invited.
In. Revitalize Portland wasn't brought in early. It was,
no,
it was kind of, this is what we have. You want to, yeah.
And we just didn't see very much of benefit in the entire package, both on the taxation side as well as on the spending side. So I think looking forward, I think we have to think about new ways to provide these services. I think trying to put them into the general fund, either the general fund of the county government or the general fund of the state legislature, is the right way to go. That might mean changing the budget priorities of the state or the county. That might mean going to the taxpayers for an operating levy on their property taxes. Could also mean at the state level, maybe tinkering with the annual increases for property tax assessed values. That would be another way of creating more money. Because I think one of the challenges that we have in our state is that by putting fairly strict limits on property taxes, local governments are often very constrained in what they can do. And frankly, we need some of those services. We certainly need them from a development point of view for things like roads, for things like water and sewer infrastructure.
But with the restriction on property taxes, you have restrictions on where they've got access to funds or to be able to raise funds.
Right. I mean, if you talk to city managers, they'll say, yes, assessed values grow by 3%, but our cost of service delivery is growing faster. So I think one of the challenges that we faced was that when we ran into this homelessness problem, or when it became top of mind, let's say in the late 2010s to 2020, local governments just didn't have the capacity to deal with that issue, and the state legislature was unwilling to increase the amount of funds needed to come up with a robust response. As it turns out, by doing what we've done, we have one of the highest funded homelessness programs of any city in the country. Again, I don't think it's necessarily doing as well as it should be doing in Multnomah County, and it interacts with other issues going on in the county, but it's very well funded.
Right. There's not an issue of funding; it's how they're using that money. And so, but again, your kind of question or issue with this is not necessarily how they're using it. It's more the structure of this new extending out this tax.
That's right. I mean, I think that when you talk to people who run housing services at the counties, what they'll say is we're trying to provide a continuum of care.
Right.
So we're trying to provide places for homeless individuals and families to come for shelters, trying to find places for them to be assessed in terms of the benefits that they qualify for,
so they can access services, and then through all the whole process to hopefully get them on their feet and back into stabilized housing.
And then if they've got major drug issues, or if they have mental illness problems, steer them towards treatment programs. So now, permanent supportive housing, which is what a lot of the housing advocates are being asked for, that's really at the end of the pipeline. And frankly, there are better ways besides building subsidized housing projects for providing that benefit. The best solution, that's out there are for portable vouchers where if the tenant is unhappy with the place that they're staying for whatever reason, they can use that voucher at some other
it's not tied to the property, it's tied to the tenant.
Exactly.
Right. And we've talked about that, nauseum over years on this, is if to really address that portion of the affordable housing issue. Again, it's not going to hit everybody on the continuum, but on that side, why would we not push more to vouchers as opposed to, the time, energy, the cost of just doing some of this affordable housing, ground up? This doesn't make sense. Vouchers would be a much more economic and quicker way to get these people into permanent housing.
I think one of the reasons that wasn't necessarily kind of highlighted or emphasized both in the initial proposal as well as in this proposed reform that we may be seeing in the May 2025 ballot is that major members of the Here Together coalition are people who are both service providers, but also people who like to, or their mission is to manage apartment buildings. And so, if your mission is to develop apartment buildings, you'd like to get some of that income to build the next project.
Yeah.
If you give somebody a portable voucher, there's no one place that you can turn to say where those 100 people are. Those 100 people are spread all across the community based upon their preferences and their total income.
And so so again, this is on the ballot in May of 2025. It'll be a metro ballot measure. It's just, Are you trying to advise people as to, kind of the downside on this? It's just interesting kind of how this coalition got put together than where we are today and trying to push this through. I mean, is it baked in and they're going to move forward with the way it's structured? Is there still time to maybe tweak this and really look at it?
There is time to tweak it, but I think that Metro is hell-bent on something.
Okay.
And so they made a presentation yesterday to MPAC, the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, basically looking for more generic support for some kind of change. I don't know what the outcome of that was last night, but it's pretty clear that the Metro Council is moving towards a decision in early January as to what will actually be on the ballot. If it's anything like the compromise proposal that was agreed to with the Portland Metro Chamber, I think that the community should oppose it. And what that would do, I mean, what that would be to set up a 4-year time window where we're still receiving all of this revenue. And we can be exploring, the counties can be exploring ways in which they can prioritize that spending and get it into their general fund. And again, I've outlined 3 different ways in which that could be handled. Again, adjusting budgets, operating levies, or having some kind of tweak at the legislative level on the amount that assessed values can increase. And I think what's good about that is that it really says that we think homelessness is something that all people should be concerned about and all people should contribute to according to their means, right? So if I live in a large house with a large assessed value, I'm going to be paying more than somebody who lives in a starter home or renters for that matter, insofar as an increase in property taxes ultimately shows up in an increase in rents.
And would this be, and again, this would all be statewide. This would not just be in the metro side.
It could be. I mean,
but each county could make the adjustments on what they want to do.
Right. If we went the route of tinkering with the property tax laws in the state, of course, that would require a statewide initiative, I believe. Then state government or county governments across the state and city governments across the state would suddenly see an influx of revenue, and they could make their decision as to whether homelessness is a big issue, or maybe that's a question of building new roads. Maybe it's a question of improving our stormwater or infrastructure. The needs are going to vary across the state. If it's a question of counties coming up with operating levies, they're going to have to put a proposal together. They're going to have to explain this issue to the voters, that there's an expiring SHS tax that needs to be replaced by something to accomplish the most important things. And in terms of accountability, I think that's something which county governments can probably defend better than Metro. Because Metro right now all they're really doing is collecting the revenue and divvying it out to the various counties on a formula. And when it's done in that way, particularly with the kind of high income tax that they've proposed, there's very little commitment on the part of individual voters as to what that spending ought to be.
So we have a lack of accountability on that, and there's from a voter standpoint, you have a very small percentage of voters funding this, so you don't have the amount of accountability across all populations in terms of how this money is being spent and allocated.
That's right. I mean, if we're only talking about 30,000, taxpayers in Multnomah County, that's really, the high end of the income spectrum. Those folks are not going to be needing homeless shelters personally. So it's taking money from them and giving to, very low income individuals. So we would be better off if that was something that was more broadly shared amongst the community. And in general, in public finance, if you have broad-based taxes, you're going to have less distortion, less negative effects than you will if you target certain individuals. Now, talking to the voters about this is a little bit more complicated, right? I mean, who sympathizes for people who have incomes over 125,000 individually or over 200,000 personally? But still, that's a good 8%, let's say, of the taxpayers in a given community. It affects things like, affects people who are like doctors, for example. There was an article recently about the difficulty of for the hospitals in finding anesthetists, right? People who are absolutely critical in an operation. Well, these folks clearly make money over those income
Portland's
levels.
the ranked last of the major metropolitan areas in trying to find a family practitioner. The longest wait times in the United States.
And-
Because I just think we talked about the disadvantage on a tax situation. You're not having these people move, or they're moving out of the area.
I mean, I've thought of trying to come up with an alternative, a poster child example. So think about something like a basketball player, like a Damon Lillard type player. What kind of difference does he have to pay in income taxes to play for the Blazers as opposed to playing for the Milwaukee Bucks, right? It's a fairly easy calculation to make based upon, his established salary. So I think as we move towards the May ballot measure, if we're stuck with what Metro and the Portland Metro Chamber have agreed to, I think we need to come up with some kind of red button examples that are easy to understand, so that we recognize that from the point of view of this really valuable person, Damon Lillard, for him to move from a low tax state to Portland, he's going to have to be paid more. So it puts the Trailblazers as a disadvantage in trying to hire that highly talented individual to move to their community, because half your games are going to be played in the Rose Garden. So half your income is going to be covered by this tax. When you play in New York and you play in other cities, that's not true. And this is an issue that's already faced in the sports community for the Toronto franchises, right?
Because the tax disadvantage they have in getting people there. But I think a lot of, how do you show that to people, how that's watered down? I think Multnomah County is getting a taste of it now when they're looking at tax returns and, high income people moving out. But as I was talking to a couple of council people, I'm worried about them moving out, but I'm also, what are you doing to incentivize people to move in?
Yeah.
Businesses and all that. If we talk about revitalizing Portland and, revitalizing the core and things like that, it's going to be businesses coming in. And with the disadvantage we have on a tax situation, it's just interesting that we'd have people, some of these groups going for this. So I think we're going to have to, have them come in and talk about it as well.
Just to kind of put a bow on it, we've been looking at the demographic data for the population of our region. We've become a very slow-growing region. In fact, the data suggests that actually our population levels are negative between 2020 and 2023. The county that's growing the fastest amongst the four in our region is Clark County, Washington, which has no income tax, and Multnomah County, they're the one that's the highest in negative terms. And from the point of view of individuals at these kind of income levels, 200,000 joint for joint filers, moving to Lake Oswego is an advantage. So moving to the suburbs is an advantage. If you have a second home, maybe a home in Gerhard or Cannon Beach, or maybe in the mountains or Bend, you can declare that to be your tax domicile. And places like Camas or other parts of Washington State, which are in commuting range for Portland, suddenly become more attractive. A couple years ago, I did a tour of one of the apartment buildings on the Vancouver waterfront. And I was expecting to see people who'd moved out of Portland, maybe they had a job change. But in fact, most of the people that we interviewed were people from California. And so what this suggests is that Multnomah County is losing its role as kind of the gateway county or the gateway city. Portland is the gateway city for our overall region, that people land in Portland first, and then maybe as they have developed families and social connections, they decide to live in the suburbs. In this case, what we were seeing was a lot of young people from California or other states landing in the metro area, but landing in Vancouver.
Right.
And they're going to develop friends, maybe church relations, maybe have a spouse that they meet, and they're going to stay in the suburbs. They're going to stay in Clark County for a long period of time. So I think there's some real challenges to our region. And the history of cities that have their own income tax that doesn't cover the entire state is not very happy. I mean, we're talking about places like New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., which all have higher tax rates in their core city as compared to their suburbs.
Surrounding area. Well, again, we'll have more discussions on this. I want to thank you for taking the time to come in and talk about this. We'll see you again on HFO-TV. Thank you, Dr. Mildner, and we'll do it again.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.